My name is Renee, I am 31, and on the day my company cut my entire department, I did not even make it to my car before my phone rang. It was my landlord. He told me I had until Saturday to be out. I asked him why, because my rent was never late, not once in 3 years. He went quiet for a second too long, and then he said something that changed how I understood my own family. He said, "Your mother and stepfather wired me money this morning to end your lease early." I did not yell, did not cry. I asked him to send me proof. 30 seconds later, a screenshot landed in my messages, and the account it came from was not a personal account at all. It was the business account for the family catering company my grandfather built from a single food truck. That was the mistake that started everything. I called my mother first. She answered like she had been waiting for it. "Sometimes you have to lose everything before you take life seriously," she said. My stepfather grabbed the phone and added, "Maybe a few nights outside will finally wake you up." Neither of them asked if I had savings. Neither of them asked where I would sleep. They had already decided the lesson mattered more than the person learning it. I hung up before my voice could crack. Then I opened my contacts and scrolled past every relative who had ever taken their side, until I reached the one name they had spent a decade telling me to avoid. Before I tell you who picked up that call and why my mother started calling me 11 times in a row 20 minutes later, tell me what city you are watching this from, and whether it is raining there too, because it was raining here, and it felt like the whole sky already knew what was coming. My landlord's name was Curtis. I had rented from him for 3 years, and I still had 8 months left on a signed lease. When I asked him for a written reason, he refused at first, until the silence on my end made him uncomfortable enough to talk. He admitted my mother had called him before I had even cleared out my desk that morning. She told him losing the job was not punishment enough, that she needed me scared and out of options so I would finally move back home and follow their rules again. They offered him $1,200 and promised to cover any legal trouble if I fought it. Curtis swore he had not deposited it yet, that he could reverse the transfer. I told him to prove it, and that screenshot showed a memo line that read, "Event consulting fee." The sender was Miller Family Catering Group. My mother Diane and my stepfather Roy ran daily operations there. Roy gave interviews about discipline and structure. My mother posted about family values on the company page every single week, and yet they had taken company money to control my private housing, then hidden the payment behind a fake label. What they seemed to forget is that the company was never fully theirs to spend from. My grandfather Walter had left it in a trust after he passed, and while my mother and Roy ran the operations, my aunt, Colleen, held the largest voting share as trustee. She lived 2 states away and almost never showed up to holidays. My mother called her nosy and difficult. Their rule in our house was simple: you do not bring Colleen into family matters. Years earlier, I had worked one summer doing the books for the company, and I watched Colleen question missing receipts while Roy laughed it off as her being paranoid. Before I left that summer, she handed me her direct number and said, "You notice things. People hope you will not. Call me if the numbers ever stop telling the truth." Before I dialed that number, I called my younger brother Tyler, hoping he knew nothing about any of this. He picked up, cheerful, and said, "I heard you're finally getting the wake-up call you needed." It sounded rehearsed, like he had practiced it. When I asked about the $1,200, he went quiet, then said, "It's just company money. It's not like they touched your savings." That single sentence told me he already knew everything. 2 years earlier, I had covered Tyler's rent for 4 months while he was between jobs, no conditions attached. When I reminded him of that, he laughed and said that was different. I had a plan. I asked if the idea to call Curtis had come from him. He called me dramatic and said maybe some fear would finally push me to get my life together. I ended the call and sat on my kitchen floor staring at the screenshot glowing on my screen. This was not new behavior dressed up as a crisis. When I was 14 and failed one math test, Roy took the door off my bedroom because privacy was apparently a reward, not a right. When I switched my college major, my mother told the entire extended family I was falling apart. When Tyler needed help, it was family loyalty. When I needed help, it was a character flaw. But this time they left a trail. The fake label on the payment mattered. The company account mattered. My valid lease mattered. They expected me to panic and crawl back to their front door. Instead, I called my best friend Marcus. Why? First instinct was generous. Maybe they think this is helping somehow. And then he stopped himself mid-sentence and said, "No, paying your landlord crosses a line that doesn't get explained away." He told me to save every screenshot in 3 different places, pull a copy of my lease, and write down the timeline while it was still fresh in my head. Then he asked one question that mattered more than anything else that day. Who can freeze this before they get the chance to rewrite what happened? I looked at Colleen's number sitting in my phone for years, untouched, for as long as I could remember. My mother had controlled every family conflict by keeping it locked inside 4 walls where she decided what was true. I pressed call. She picked up on the second ring. "Renee," she said, "this is unexpected." I told her I had lost my job that morning, but I did not stop there to be comforted. I told her about Curtis, about the $1,200, about the transfer from the company account. I forwarded the screenshot while I was still talking. She was quiet long enough that I could hear my own heartbeat. "Do you have the lease and his messages?" she asked. "Yes." "Did the board ever approve a consulting arrangement with this landlord?" "No, he isn't a consultant, he's my landlord." "Send me everything right now," she said. "Do not warn your mother. Do not threaten Curtis. I am freezing discretionary account access today and issuing a records preservation notice." I asked how she could move that fast. "I am the trustee and I hold majority voting shares," she said. "I can stop an unauthorized payment before anyone has time to invent a justification for it." My phone started buzzing before I even hung up. My mother called once, then twice, then 11 times back to back. Colleen told me the account had already been frozen, and legal counsel had instructed everyone involved to preserve every record they had. 3 minutes later, Roy called. A text followed it. "Answer me right now." Colleen told me I could take the call, but only on speaker, and only if I said up front that she was listening too. I accepted. "What did you do?" Roy shouted the second the line connected. "I reported an unauthorized company transaction to the trustee," I said. "You called Colleen." His anger cracked into something closer to panic. My mother's voice rose behind him. "Renee, this is a family issue. You had no right to drag the business into it. The business paid my landlord," I said. "You dragged it in first." Roy accused me of treating them like criminals over $1,200. Colleen cut in, calm and flat. "No one has called anyone a criminal. I am reviewing an expense labeled event consulting fee. I need the contract, the invoice, the business purpose, and the approval record by 5 o'clock today." Roy claimed they were only trying to teach me responsibility. Colleen replied, "Then you used the wrong account, the wrong label, and the wrong method entirely. Do not contact the landlord again," she said, "and do not pressure Renee to give up her apartment." My mother said I had become too dependent and needed an intervention. For the first time in my life, someone separated that accusation from the actual facts on the table. "Her employment situation has nothing to do with whether company funds were misused," Colleen said. Roy threatened to call an emergency board meeting. Colleen told him to go ahead and to bring the paperwork with him. Then she ended the call. My apartment looked exactly the same, but something underneath it had shifted completely. My mother had always been the one who decided how every argument would be remembered. If I pushed back, I was emotional. If I asked questions, I was disrespectful. If I brought in anyone outside, the 4 of us, I was betraying the family. Their real power was never wisdom. It was isolation, plain and simple. Marcus showed up that night with groceries, a phone charger, and a legal pad, and instead of telling me what to do, he asked what I actually needed. We built a timeline together, I was laid off at 9 that morning. I called my mother by 9:40. Curtis called me by 10:15. That meant my mother had reached him almost immediately, faster than grief, faster than a phone call to check if I was okay. They had not spent the day worrying about me. They had spent it executing a plan. That afternoon, a tenant rights attorney named Priya called me back. She explained that a landlord generally cannot end a fixed term lease without legal grounds, and that accepting outside money to remove a lawful tenant could create real liability for him. She told me to put everything in writing from now on and asked Curtis directly whether he intended to honor my lease. Within the hour, he emailed that his earlier demand had been premature and that no eviction would move forward. It wasn't an apology. It was fear wearing a professional tone. Priya warned me that stopping the eviction was only the opening move. My mother might call it a misunderstanding. Roy might minimize his part in it. Tyler might deny knowing anything at all. Evidence would matter more than my anger ever could. Then, Colleen requested a full independent audit. She had already confirmed the consulting fee had no contract, no invoice, and no board approval anywhere in the records. Digging further back, she found personal vacations logged as vendor scouting trips, family dinners labeled staff appreciation events, and payments connected to Tyler tucked inside marketing budgets. I remembered seeing entries like that during my summer doing the books, and Roy telling me the accounting was too complicated for someone my age to understand. That night, Colleen sent one short message. The numbers stopped matching the story a long time ago. My mother and Roy had tried to buy my eviction for $1,200. Before the sun went down that same day, that single payment had triggered a review of years of spending. By morning, my mother and Roy were already rewriting the story. She emailed Colleen claiming the money was meant as a relocation cushion to protect me from future rent increases. Roy produced a one-page consulting agreement naming Curtis as an advisor on tenant transitions. The signature line was blank, and the file's own metadata showed it had been created after Colleen asked for proof. They had built an explanation only after getting caught. Roy called me from a number I did not recognize. "You're tearing apart the business your grandfather built," he said. "No," I said. "You used it to punish me." He accused Colleen of using me to seize control of the company. For a moment, doubt crept in, because they had spent years telling us every relative outside our four walls had hidden motives. Then I looked at the fake label, the backdated document, and the eviction text still sitting in my messages, and I understood that facts do not stop being true just because exposing them shifts who holds the power. He ended the call by saying, "You will not last a month without us." That sentence stuck, because part of it might actually come true. I had limited savings, 2 weeks of severance, and no job lined up. Winning the lease fight would not rebuild my entire life on its own. I could not let revenge become my only plan, and I could not let my parents remain the center of every decision I made from now on. Marcus and I split the crisis into 4 pieces: housing, legal protection, income, and money. Priya secured written confirmation that my lease remained fully active. I cut every non-essential expense and calculated exactly how many months I could cover rent alone. Then I reached out to former coworkers and old clients. Asking for help felt humiliating at first, because my whole life I had been taught that needing anything was a failure. Marcus pushed back on that. "You are not asking anyone to carry you," he said. "You are letting people know you're available." My first interview went badly. When the hiring manager asked how I handle conflict, I remembered Roy shouting on the phone and completely lost my train of thought. The interview ended early, and I walked out convinced they had been right about me all along. Marcus did not offer empty comfort. "That one hurt," he said. "Take what you can learn from it and let the rest go." While I kept searching, the audit uncovered a much wider pattern. Over several years, my mother and Roy had used company funds for personal travel, home renovations, Tyler's certifications, and family events, disguised under vague business descriptions with missing approvals. Money had also been pulled from equipment and maintenance reserves into discretionary accounts without proper sign-off. Tyler called after his company card stopped working. I hadn't even known he had one. He accused me of ruining his career. I asked if he was actually an employee. He claimed he consulted on branding, but the auditor found no contract, no payroll record, and no documented project tied to his name anywhere. Then he let it slip. They were going to let you move into the lake cabin once you apologized. The cabin belonged to the company. My mother and Roy had planned to force me out of my legal apartment, let me believe I had nowhere left to go, and then offer controlled housing only after I submitted to their terms. They wanted to manufacture the emergency and then play the rescue. "Thank you," I said. "For what?" he asked. "For explaining the plan out loud," I said, and I wrote every word of it down. Priya also requested Curtis's messages with my family. Facing his own exposure, he handed them over without a fight. My mother had written, "She'll panic, but do not back down from it." Roy had written, "Once she has nowhere else, she'll come home and listen to us again." Tyler had reacted with a thumbs up and asked if the cabin should stay off limits until I apologized. For years I had wondered whether their version of love was simply something I had never learned to understand correctly. Reading those messages made the answer painfully clear. They may have felt something like love, but they used fear and access to make it conditional, and feeling something does not excuse the method you choose to express it. Colleen asked whether I wanted every message sent straight to the full board. My first instinct was to expose all of it at once. Priya asked what I actually wanted most: protection, accountability, or humiliation. I admitted I wanted all three. "Humiliation is the one you can't fully control," she said. "Protection and accountability can be documented and proven." I submitted only what was directly relevant to the payment and my lease. I did not post any of it publicly, and I did not send it through the rest of the family. That restraint mattered. More later than I expected it to. The emergency board meeting was set for Friday. The night before, my mother left a soft voicemail talking about how families make mistakes, and in the very last line she asked me to tell Colleen the payment had actually been my idea. I saved that recording in 3 separate places. I joined the board meeting by video call from Marcus's living room. On screen sat Colleen, 2 independent board members, company counsel, the auditor, my mother, Roy, and Tyler. Roy wore the same expression he always used when he wanted confidence to stand in for actual proof. My mother held a folder labeled Family Resolution Plan. Colleen laid out the purpose plainly: unauthorized spending, a falsified expense, description, and interference with a tenant's active lease. She referred to me not as her niece, but as the affected tenant. And that small shift stripped away all the emotional noise instantly. Roy called the $1,200 compassionate assistance and claimed Curtis simply misunderstood the intent. My mother presented a proposed family support plan requiring me to move into the cabin, attend financial coaching sessions with Roy, submit every job application for their approval first, and repay housing costs later on their schedule. She framed it as proof they only wanted to help. One board member asked when exactly the plan had been written. My mother said after my layoff. The file metadata showed it was 3 weeks old. That detail landed harder than anything else that day. They had prepared terms to control my housing before I had even lost my job. They knew restructuring was coming because Tyler had heard rumors through a contact in recruiting weeks earlier. A recovered message from him read, "Renee's team might get cut. This could be our chance to finally force the reset." My mother had replied, "Start thinking through the housing pressure. Roy will handle the landlord." The room went completely silent. My parents had not reacted to sudden bad news. They had simply been waiting for it. Roy spun toward Tyler and snapped, "Why would you keep that message?" In one sentence, he threw away the son who had helped him the most. Tyler stared at him like he had just learned that being the favorite was never loyalty. It was only usefulness. Colleen asked for my statement. Said I was not asking the company to solve my unemployment or to punish anyone simply for being unkind. I was asking it to address a company account used to manufacture a private housing crisis. a fake label used to hide the payment, and a plan that treated business money as a tool for family control. Then I played my mother's voicemail asking me to say the whole thing had been my idea. Roy leaned back in his chair. My mother closed her eyes. The auditor presented preliminary findings, unsupported reimbursements, personal expenses disguised as business costs, and money pulled from maintenance reserves without any required approval. One of those transfers had delayed a kitchen repair after staff reported a gas leak. Risk. Their entitlement had put more than just me at risk. During a short recess, Roy texted, "Stop this right now and we can still be a family," I replied. Family was never supposed to require my silence. When the meeting resumed, the board suspended my mother and Roy's management and financial authority pending the full completion of the audit. Tyler's access was cut immediately. An outside manager was appointed to protect staff, accounts, and every remaining record. The board also authorized efforts to recover the unsupported personal expenses. Roy shouted that Colleen had staged a takeover. My mother started crying, and her first question was, "What are we supposed to tell people?" Even then, the image mattered more to her than the repair. The meeting ended without a final repayment figure, but their day-to-day control was already gone. They could no longer move money, pressure employees, or use company property as a reward for obedience. 2 hours later, Curtis reached out to settle. His first offer included written confirmation of my lease and reimbursement for some legal costs. Priya rejected it outright. She demanded a formal statement that I had never defaulted, payment of every documented expense, a rent credit, a renewal, option with a capped increase, and mandatory landlord law training from an independent provider. He agreed after a few days of pushback. The man who tried to turn my home into a bargaining chip now had to sign terms that protected my tenancy instead. That same afternoon, the marketing firm from my failed interview sent a rejection email. For a moment, the old story tried to rush back in, unemployed, unstable, unable to function without my parents. Then, a former client named Sonia emailed me out of nowhere. I had reached out to her earlier in the week. She needed a contract strategist for 3 months and asked if I could start Monday. The pay was slightly below my old salary, and the position was temporary. It wasn't a magic rescue. It was work I had earned through a relationship I had built long before any of this started. I accepted immediately. Marcus and I celebrated with takeout. On my apartment floor, surrounded by boxes I no longer had to pack. Tyler messaged me, "Dad says this is your fault. Mom won't stop crying. Colleen ruined everything. Are you proud of yourself?" I typed several angry replies and deleted every one of them, then finally wrote, "I'm proud that I stopped cooperating with something wrong." He never responded. Over the following month, the audit became impossible for my mother and Roy to explain away. Company records showed personal travel, renovations, private events, and hidden payments to Tyler buried under vague labels. The board's lawyers began calculating a repayment figure. Industry invitations were quietly withdrawn because my parents no longer represented the company publicly. The image they had protected so carefully began collapsing under records they had created themselves. My mother called me from an unknown number and said, "You took my reputation. You built a story around this that isn't even true." I replied, "We never would have let you actually become homeless. You needed me to believe that we would." She had no answer for that. The silence gave me the clearest picture yet of what they had actually been planning. They had wanted fear, not failure. They had intended to hold the rescue over my head until I finally surrendered. The full audit arrived 6 weeks later. It identified more than $200,000 in unsupported or improperly approved personal expenses across 8 years. Not every item was unrecoverable, and a few could be reclassified if valid records eventually surfaced, but the overall pattern was undeniable. The board permanently removed my mother and Roy from management, canceled the salaries and benefits, tied to their positions, and demanded substantial repayment. They kept minority ownership on paper, but lost the expense accounts, the vehicles, and the authority that had propped up their public image for years. An outside manager restored the maintenance reserves and opened a formal complaint process for staff. Problems Roy had dismissed for years were finally being addressed properly. The company started actually behaving like the ethical business my parents had spent years advertising it as. Priya proposed a separate resolution for my personal situation. My mother and Roy would reimburse costs Curtis hadn't already covered, sign a non-interference agreement, stop contacting my employers and landlords, and formally acknowledge that I had never requested that payment in the first place. In exchange, I would not pursue further civil claims unless they violated those terms. Roy refused at first because signing it would make him look guilty. Then the board's repayment demand put real pressure on their personal finances. To cover part of it, they sold the lake cabin, the exact property they had planned to dangle in front of me only after I apologized. The symbol of their control became one of the assets used to pay for the damage they caused. They signed 2 days before Priya was set to file anyway. The agreement barred them from interfering with my housing or work, from making transactions in my name, and from publicly claiming I had asked for the eviction myself. It also contained a written acknowledgement that they had initiated the payment specifically to pressure me out of my apartment. It wasn't an apology. It was simply a truth they could no longer rewrite. Tyler faced consequences too. His recruiting firm reviewed how he had obtained and shared the confidential restructuring rumor. He was placed on leave and eventually resigned. He called me furious. "You destroyed my career," he said. "You passed along confidential information so they could plan how to corner me," I said. "I didn't think they would actually go through with it, and yet you reacted to the plan with a thumbs up." He went quiet, then admitted, "They always said you thought you were better than us. I wanted them to see I was loyal." For the first time, I understood his part in it without excusing any of it. My parents rewarded him whenever he served their version of the story and blamed him instantly the moment his own messages became evidence against them. Favoritism had made him feel safe, but only for as long as he stayed useful. "I hope you figure out who you are when loyalty stops meaning obedience," I told him, "but I can't do that work for you." I didn't respond to him for a month after that. Roy sent letters about sacrifice and gratitude. None of them contained the words I was wrong. He told relatives I had manipulated Colleen to seize control of the company. That story collapsed the moment Colleen issued a formal statement confirming I would receive no ownership, payment, or job from any part of the audit because I had never asked for any of it. Roy could not imagine anyone acting without personal gain in mind, so he simply invented one for me. My mother's final message before the agreement took effect read, "We did what we thought was best." I replied, "Believing something is best doesn't erase responsibility for what it actually does," and then I stopped responding. My contract job kept me busy. During the first month, stress caused me to miss a minor deadline. I expected to be humiliated for it. Instead, my new manager simply asked for a recovery plan, so I gave her one, fixed the issue, and moved forward. That single interaction taught me more about real accountability than every speech Roy had ever given me. Actual accountability requires truth, repair, and changed behavior, not a manufactured disaster designed to control someone. At the end of 3 months, Sonia offered me a permanent role leading client strategy. The salary matched my old job and the terms were noticeably better. I negotiated before accepting, and that detail mattered to me. I was not grabbing the first offer out of fear. I was reviewing it, asking questions, and choosing it on my own terms. The night I signed, I stood beside my apartment door for a long moment. Months earlier, my parents had treated that door like a lever they could pull whenever they wanted. Now it was simply mine to open or close. I still don't feel triumphant every single day. Some mornings I miss the family I thought I had. Some nights I replay every call and wonder if I could have handled it more quietly. Then I remember that quiet was exactly what had protected them for years. They had counted on my shame lasting longer than Curtis's willingness to cooperate. Their punishment never made me stronger. Stopping it did. 6 months after the layoff, Colleen invited me to the company's annual meeting. I skipped the formal appearance but met her for coffee afterward. She told me repairs were underway, financial. Controls had been completely rewritten and staff could now report problems without going through my mother or Roy at all. The company had recovered enough to rebuild its reserves. My parents remained owners on paper but held no operational authority whatsoever. Their repayment plan would continue for years. "Do you regret calling me?" Colleen asked. I thought about the cost. My relationship with my mother and Roy had become something closer to a legal boundary than a family bond. Tyler and I barely spoke anymore. Extended relatives had picked sides. There was no version of this that gave me back the family I once believed existed. "No," I said. "I only regret that calling you was ever necessary in the first place." She nodded and said that's usually exactly how accountability feels. I asked why she had given me her number all those years ago. She said her father once told her that family businesses fail when relatives confuse access with ownership and affection with permission. Colleen had suspected something was wrong for years, but suspicion always arrived before proof. The payment to Curtis was different. A false label, a private motive, a cooperative witness, and a direct victim willing to speak up. "You didn't destroy them," she said. "You interrupted them." My parents didn't become homeless or disappear. Their consequences were real, not theatrical. They moved out of their large house into a much smaller apartment. Roy took on consulting work that actually required real invoices and outside approval this time. My mother stopped speaking at industry events entirely. Tyler eventually found work outside recruiting after completing a mandatory ethics course. Their lives continued, just without the authority and image that had shielded them from ever being questioned. 3 months after the agreement was signed, my mother emailed asking to meet. She had followed every term of the agreement without pressuring me once, so I agreed to 30 minutes at a public coffee shop. At first she talked about the embarrassment, the audit, the house. I waited. Finally, she said, I was wrong to call Curtis. It was the first direct acceptance of responsibility I had ever heard from her in my entire life. She admitted the family support plan had been written before my layoff even happened. She admitted they had planned to make me believe I had nowhere left to go, then offer the cabin only if I accepted their conditions afterward. "Why?" I asked. "Because you were making choices without us," she said. "Roy thought you were drifting too far away from the family, and there it was. They had never actually feared my failure. They had feared my independence the entire time." I told her I wasn't ready for anything resembling a normal relationship, and that I might never be. An apology without consistent change would not reopen my life to them. She cried, but she didn't argue with me. When our time was up, she asked permission to email again in a month. I said yes. Roy chose a different path. Entirely. He mailed me a copy of the signed agreement with a short note attached. "You won." I mailed it back with my own note. "This was never a contest. I only ever wanted you to stop." He never contacted me again after that. Some people expected me to publish every message, take over the company myself, or celebrate every single loss publicly. I did none of that. I kept my apartment, recovered my costs, secured stable work, protected my name, and forced the people who used money as a weapon to actually repay. What they had taken, their authority ended. Their actions became records they could never rewrite again. That was enough for me. On the first anniversary of my layoff, I renewed my lease. I read every single clause, asked Priya exactly one question, and signed it. Then I hung my keys on the hook beside my own front door. Year earlier, I thought losing my job meant losing proof that I could take care of myself. My parents tried to turn that fear into obedience. Their plan ended up showing me exactly where my real power had been hiding the entire time, in documents, in boundaries, in witnesses, and in the willingness to ask for help before panic turned into surrender. Marcus stayed my friend, not my rescuer. We disagreed plenty. He told me when I was becoming consumed by the audit, and I told him when his advice sounded too simple for what I was dealing with. He never replaced my family. He helped me recognize which relationships actually offered support without demanding submission in return. Sonia later promoted me to help train younger strategists at the firm. The lesson I repeated to myself the most was simple. Mistakes are information, not identity. People grow through truth, tools, and room to actually repair things, not through someone manufacturing a crisis and calling it love afterward. Tyler eventually emailed me. "I helped them corner you because being useful to them made me feel safe. I'm sorry, I waited 2 weeks before replying." I thanked him for finally being honest and agreed to occasional emails, nothing more than that. It wasn't reconciliation, It was one small unlocked window in a house where every other door stayed closed. My mother kept writing every month. I ignored the defensive messages and responded to the accountable ones. Slowly, she learned that access was never guaranteed by a title. It had to be earned through consistency over time. Roy chose silence, and eventually I stopped interpreting that silence as another form of punishment. Coming from someone who had always used words to control me, that silence finally started to feel like peace instead. The $1,200 was never really about rent. It was the price my parents paid to try and purchase fear. They believed fear would bring me home. Instead, it triggered an audit, exposed years of misconduct, ended their control of the business, forced a full repayment, cost them the cabin, damaged the reputation they had spent years protecting, and placed permanent limits on their access to my life going forward. They told me I had to fall before I could ever change. They were right about exactly one thing. I did change. I stopped confusing cruelty with discipline. I stopped mistaking secrecy for loyalty. I stopped waiting for the people who hurt me to admit that I had actually been hurt. Most importantly, I learned that protecting yourself is not revenge just because the people losing power decide to call it betrayal. The morning I lost my job, I thought my entire life had been reduced to one terrible phone call. By that afternoon, I made another one instead. That second call didn't save me through some kind of magic. It simply gave the truth somewhere to go. Everything that came after, organizing the evidence, facing the board, rebuilding my income, and enforcing my own boundaries, was work I still had to do myself. So when Roy screamed, "What did you do?" the real answer was never just that I had called Colleen. The real answer was that I had stopped asking permission to defend my own life. And once I did that, their $1,200 lesson became the most expensive mistake either of them ever made. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment and reflection. It is not based on any real people or events. If it reminded you of anything in your own life, we hope it reminded you that love should never require you to stay silent just to keep someone else comfortable.